stopped. I think it stopped. I'm not. Oh no.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining today. We will just give it a couple of minutes while we let people continue to sign in, and we will get started with the presentation in around 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome to today's Energy Technology List webinar. Just before we get started with the presentation, I'll go over a few housekeeping notes. So you will have joined this webinar using your computer audio system, but if you'd prefer to join over the phone, you can select telephone in the audio pane and you'll see the dial-in information displayed. Also, you'll have the opportunity in this webinar to ask any questions by typing these into the questions pane of the control panel. You can send your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and do our best to answer them during the Q&A at the end of the webinar. Also, the webinar is being recorded. We'll be sending out the recording and also the slides afterwards for your reference. Okay, great. So now I will pass you over to today's presenters. May, over to you.
Thanks, Annie. So I'm May Lagzawi from the Carbon Trust, and I'll be presenting the webinar today alongside Kay Relton from the Carbon Trust and Tom Locke from ICF. So the Carbon Trust and ICF are contracted by BEIS to manage the ETL. And today we're going to be looking at the 2020 update to the energy technology criteria. I'll just run through the agenda with you. So we're going to be looking at the updates to the energy technology list, then covering the summary of the criteria changes. Then we'll look at the ETL cycle of changes and highlight some key dates and timescales. We'll go over the process of adding new ETL products to the list, and then look at some of the updated ETL content and upcoming relevant events. And then, as Annie mentioned, we'll have some time at the end to go over any questions that you have during the webinar. So firstly, in terms of updates to the energy technology list, the ETL consultation is now live, and it's in two parts. The first part is looking at the future direction of the energy technology list scheme, and the second part looking at the technical changes to the energy technology criteria list. So the consultation is open for feedback at the moment, and that is live until the 7th of August, 11:45 p.m. if you want to feedback on anything in that. There's also an ongoing website redevelopment project at the moment. So BEIS are working on improving the user journey for ETL users and looking to consolidate the current ETL search page and the ETL website into one main site. Some of the developments that are happening are around the search function, so improving the search function, adding filters and sorting options. We're also looking to add a comparison function, so users will be able to compare different ETL products side by side. And this has been carried out with lots of different user testing, looking at a variety of stakeholders, making sure that all different stakeholders' needs are met with these improvements. And we're also looking at creating an API as part of this website redevelopment. This would provide the industry with the capability to integrate the ETL search into their own applications. And we're also looking at SMEs as well and reviewing the current ETL offering and seeing how the SME needs might differ from what we currently have and how we can best align to those needs and meet some of the SME needs with updated guidance. So I'll hand over to Tom Locke now, who's going to talk through the criteria changes.
Thanks very much, May. So hello, everybody. My name's Tom Locke. I work for ICF, and I program manage the delivery of the ETL research program. So May just talked about the ETCL 2020 consultation, the part 2. And this is the research program that we delivered in 2019. So May, if you just go to the next slide, please. So during last year, we reviewed 15 ETL subtechnologies. We have made from that 12 revisions, recommended 1 removal, 1 new technology to add, and then 1 of the studies was placed on hold. So last summer, we delivered 12 stakeholder consultation meetings. And amongst those 12, we had 50 stakeholders that participated, including 7 trade associations. So including HVAC, ICOM and the Combustion Engineering Association, Gambika, Solar Trade Association, and Lighting Trade Associations too. Last year, we evolved our market data collection exercise to pull out the sort of qualitative elements and the quantitative elements. So this was liaising with stakeholders to collect feedback on our technical reviews from last year. In terms of outcomes, we have raised the performance thresholds for 6 of our technologies and maintained thresholds for 7. I shall go into those in a moment in more detail. We have changed and expanded the scope of 5 technologies in the review, and we also renamed another 5. We've introduced a new technology grouping in our boiler equipment subtechnologies. And finally, we also have changing 1 technology from an unlisted approach, so that's not being listed on the ETL, to a listed approach on the ETL. So I'll go into more detail on all these points in the next slide. So thank you, Mike. So to summarize our revisions to our existing subtechnologies, 4 were in our boiler equipment, 2 motors, 1 in refrigeration, 1 in HVAC, 1 in our heat recovery air-to-air, 1 in our portable energy monitoring, 1 in solar thermal, and 1 in pipework installation. Next slide, please. We've removing 1 subtechnology, but this is actually being subsumed within one of the revisions on the previous slide. So that's the building environment zone controls. So whilst it looks like a removal, it is actually being included into another existing subtechnology. Next one, please. We're adding a new subtechnology, so that's wastewater heat recovery systems. So that's recovering waste heat from shower systems, and we're using that to heat the incoming water. Next slide, please. So let's just summarize these changes in scope that we've made from last year's program. So portable energy monitoring equipment, we've improved the product categorization within that subtechnology, so differentiating energy monitors and loggers, and power quality analyzers. For both converter fed and line operated motors, we've basically expanded in line with the accompanying eco-design regulation. For pipework installation, we've added in fittings as well as the regular pipework installation. And for solar thermal, we've removed systems from the scope of the subtechnology, which they basically weren't being utilized on ETL, and we've all got only collectors in our subtechnology scope, so that's just correcting that. So that's the summary of our scope changes. And next slide, please. And we've also made some name changes as well. So you've got the former name and the new name with each bullet. So building environment zone controls, now renamed HVAC building controls. Flue gas economizers are now non-condensing economizers. That's reflecting how the industry refers to them. Air-to-air energy recovery devices are now heat recovery ventilation units. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, solar thermal systems and collectors are now just solar thermal collectors. And heat recovery from condensate and boiler blowdown is now even longer. So it's heat recovery from flash steam and boiler blowdown concentrate. So that reflects the changes or the refinement we made in the scope. So we also refined the name as well. Next slide, please. This is more of a just positional changing. So each sub-technology is linked to a technology family. And so we have one large technology family for boiler equipment currently, and this will be changing to 2 different technology families. And it's more about how the user, when they approach the ETL website, sees and comes across the different sub-technology equipment. So on the right-hand side now, we're basically going to be putting the actual boilers into boiler equipment, and then the equipment that you would use typically to retrofit existing boiler equipment into a new technology family. It doesn't alter the criteria in any way, but is more positional to help the users coming to the website. So next slide, please. So let's just going to walk through the changes to each of the sub-technologies. So this is the boiler retrofit equipment. So retrofit burner control systems, we've not made too many changes, basically updated references to test standards reflecting newer additions. We've maintained the performance thresholds, and we clarified an issue, slight ambiguity around VS variable speed drives to make sure that it's very clear they are allowed in those systems. Condensing economizers, a test standard reference has been updated. Thresholds remain the same as they were, so no change there on the thresholds for non-condensing economizers. So again, it references the same test standard which is being updated, and we have uplifted our performance thresholds from 3 to 4.5% improvements in net boiler efficiency. Not many changes to heat recovery from flash steam and boiler blowdown concentrate, so we've clarified the scope and updated the reference to the pressure equipment directive. So next slide, please. On HVAC equipment, so HVAC body controls, we have evolved the definitions to be in line with new industry norms, which is a very strong message from industry 15232. We have updated eligibility requirements in line with another standard from that family. We have as well updated our eligibility requirements to position ETL as a class A for controls, and introduce a new category for localized ventilation controls. And as I mentioned earlier on, products within the heating management controls for wet heating systems will be included within HVAC building controls. Next slide, please. In terms of motors, so we have, for both, we've expanded the scope in line with eco-design regulations, so that's smaller motor sizes and larger motor sizes up to 1,000 kilowatts. We have set IE3 as a performance threshold for the smaller expansion in scope, and set IE4 for the larger rating motors. So this is both for line operated and converter fed. For line operated, we've raised a threshold to IE4 for the 0.75 to 7.5 kilowatts, and maintained IE4 as the performance threshold for 7.5 to 375 kilowatts. The thresholds have remained the same for converter fed motors for the ratings that are in scope previously. We have expanded the scope for line operated AC motors to include XSEB increased safety motors, ATEX, set a threshold set at IE2, and we've introduced some tier 2 requirements to fall in line with the eco-design regulation when they change, so that'll be in 2023. And finally, on converter fed motors, we've introduced 2 new test standards, which are more and increasingly being used by the industry, so we've reflected those in the criteria. Next slide, please. And covering off remaining sub-technologies, so solar thermal, we updated a reference to a new test standard that's being used. For pipework insulation, as I mentioned, that's gone from an unlisted to a listed, so pipework insulation products will now be listed on the ETL website. We've expanded the scope to fittings, as I mentioned earlier, and introduced a standard for compliance with. Otherwise, the performance thresholds remain unchanged, and a new standard as well has been included, which is being increasingly used by industry. On cellar cooling equipment, we have amended the test standard, which was PAS 57. We've included an addendum to introduce a new parameter, seasonal energy efficiency ratio. This was in partnership with the industry. And we have introduced a requirement to declare the refrigerants that are used when testing. So that's an information requirement. The current thresholds remain unchanged for COP, and we will now enter into a transition period to support the change from COP to SEER over the life of this next review. So basically maintaining 2 performance parameters as we transition. Next slide, please. Portable energy monitoring equipment, quite a few changes here. So for power quality analyzers, we set performance thresholds. We've amended the functionality requirements for portable monitors, removing hardware data analysis, which is now not being used. It's all software based. We've introduced requirements for energy monitoring loggers, around a 3% measurement accuracy requirement. Improved definitions for what portable is and for what gas effectively is. We've introduced a support function requirement, so users can get advice on how to use the product, which we were told from industry was a common trend for users to get in touch with the manufacturer. And we've specified relevant directives to comply with. On heat recovery ventilation units, we've uplifted the performance thresholds to 78% efficiency for both plate type and rotary type heat exchangers. We've introduced eligibility requirements for the fans and filters and sensors, clarified the scope to position the sub-technology criteria around the ventilation unit, not just the heat exchanger. We have refined our eligibility requirements, so the focus is on 100% nominal airflow and updated references to test standards. Thanks, mate. Next slide. And I think my final slide, this is the introduction of a new sub-technology on ETL, so wastewater heat recovery from effectively showers. So there are 3 different types of category of products. We've introduced eligibility requirements around Legionella, RAS approval, and set performance thresholds for each particular category. So I think that's my last slide. Okay.
Great, thank you, Tom. Now I'm just going to go through the ETL cycle. So looking at the process behind the ETL changes, the technologies affected by criteria changes are identified. Then there's a process of identifying which products meet the new criteria and what additional evidence is required. So it's important to note that not all the products will meet the new criteria, but for ones that might, then we might require additional evidence. So then we'll get in contact with manufacturers regarding any affected products. This has been happening since the 16th of July. And manufacturers will be reminded to submit any additional evidence as required. This will happen from the 3rd of August. And then where required, manufacturers will need to submit new evidence by the 10th of August. So that's for the majority. There are some manufacturers which will need to submit it by the 17th, but most aim for the 10th of August. And then products not meeting the new criteria will be removed from the ETL when the changes take effect. So manufacturers will be notified of the outcomes of the reassessment by the 14th of September. And the changes are anticipated to go live at the 28th of September. I'll just hand over to Kay, who'll talk you through the process of adding new ETL products.
Thank you, May, and please do keep adding your questions as we go along, and we'll take those at the end. So next slide. Thank you. So every year we consider for those technologies affected by the criteria changes, and that means this year we have 12 of the 56, when we should start checking any new applications against not just the current criteria, but also the new ones being introduced shortly. And that's so we can be prompting manufacturers early on for any new information that may be needed against the new criteria. So our product application assessment process is first looking at, does the product meet both the current and the new criteria? so i.e. the ones that are planned to come into force on 28th of September. And that's for any categories that are changing. And if so, if they do meet those, the product goes on the list and then stays on there when the new criteria are introduced. That's a big tick. So the next scenario could be, does the product meet the current criteria but not the new criteria? And in that case, there's a temporary addition of the product to the list until the new criteria come into force. The third scenario, does the product meet the current criteria, but we would need to have more information for the new criteria to be reached. And in that case, the ETL team get in touch with the applicant to ask for the additional information now to give manufacturers as much time as possible before 28th September. And then finally, if the product doesn't meet the current criteria, then obviously it's not added to the ETL, but manufacturers can copy the application at a later date and resubmit with new evidence. So that's the process with the aim of getting everything that we need really well before 28th of September. Next slide. So in this slide, we've picked out some of the key documents that will be useful on the ETL scheme for manufacturers and purchasers as well. So we've divided those up a bit. And as well as the useful site links, that includes links to the new government website for the ETL and to ETL's relatively new LinkedIn page as well. So in the first column for manufacturers, how to make a product application for the ETL, and you will be able to click on these links when we send you round a copy of the slides. So we've updated that with the end of the enhanced capital allowance. We did go through a process of removing reference to the ECA in the documents. So we've done an update of that one. And that will tell you, give you guidance, it will give you screenshots of the pages, tell you how to upload supporting documents, for example, like your quality assurance certificate test report once you put in the product details. So there's a testing guidance note 5, and we'll be updating that further with any changes to the criteria shortly. We've got a manufacturer's toolkit, so that gives you tips for promoting your product on the ETL and how you can use the ETL logo. There's the information fact sheet, so this is like an FAQs document, so it mentions which technologies are on the ETL, what the difference is between a listed and unlisted technology, how to go about introducing a new technology. So there's a bit more option now for doing that, and us making faster changes for new technologies, as it's no longer linked to that tax scheme, the enhanced capital allowance. And also other information about where you'll find other sorts of guidance. And then the last one in that manufacturers column is the ETL scheme presentation. So I think this is probably one of the most useful documents you'll find, and that you can quickly run through it. It gives a few case studies from the ETL that you can use with your customers. It gives you a breakdown of the list by technologies, explains that sort of we are attracting the top quartile, the top 25% of energy efficient products on the ETL. That's the aim of the scheme. So then for purchasers, we have a flyer that we use at events. It's just, it's 2 pages. It gives general scheme information, and it gives an example of energy savings and costs from a lighting project. So if you are wanting to give something quickly to your customers, that might be something that you give them. It lists out all the different technologies. We have if they really want more detail about the scheme, the ETL 272 is one of the original documents about the scheme. It goes into more explanation than the flyer does about the scheme. And then we have the manufacturer's fact sheet. We also have the purchasers fact sheet, again FAQs, for example, how to get a statement of compliance from a manufacturer in the case of an unlisted technology. And then you have the presentation for them as well. So again, something if they just want to flick through what the scheme's all about in a presentation format, that can be really useful. Then other links, so obviously you've got the Find ETL product list with all the products, and as May mentioned, we're updating that whole section so that we have images of products people can compare, sort, filter, to make it a lot more visual and yeah, improving the functionality of that. And as May mentioned, we're creating an API so that organizations can register to get that API. The new government website is the one that has a purchasers and manufacturers tab, so it's a new base website. So we've done phase 1 of creating those tabs for different users. And the second phase is what is being developed now by the IT company that will expect you to go live about September time with the product images, etc. I'm going to have ETL LinkedIn page, which has been very successful in us putting up information, pictures about the scheme and reaching a much wider audience. So it's in terms of social media, that's one of the key things that we'll be using to promote the ETL in future. So thank you. Oh, one more, the next slide, May, please. Thank you. So the technology information leaflet. So these publications have been around now for about 4 years, and we've refreshed them recently to remove mention of the enhanced capital allowance and replace this with the annual investment allowance for the time period in which that the AIA increased for 2 years from January to 2019, making it very attractive and form of accelerated tax relief in the same way that the enhanced capital allowance was an accelerated tax relief. So in these documents, we've got some calculations in there of the cost and energy savings, both and for the annual savings and over the lifetime of the product. So at the moment we've updated these fairly recently to take out ECA mention, but we're now doing another review in order to how can we make these publications a bit more user-friendly, particularly to SMEs, and how to make those energy and cost savings stand out and have them a lot more visible on the website. So these documents currently are PDFs on the site, and also we'll be looking to make those HTML so that if people are searching, they can find them more easily. So thank you. Over to May on events.
Thanks, Kay. I'm just going to run through some of the upcoming events that might be of interest to ETL stakeholders. So the first one is a webinar run by the Carbon Trust, Getting to Net Zero for Cities and Regions, Measuring and Managing Scope 3 Emissions. This will take place on the 12th of August, and it's looking at how public sector bodies can manage the carbon impact of organisational Scope 3 emissions through different footprinting methods and engaging with suppliers. The second one is a webinar run by the Carbon Trust on the 3rd of September, looking at implementing climate action plans. So that's going to explore the delivery of climate action plans, working with in-house staff and external contractors, and looking at a variety of funding mechanisms. And the final one is a scenario planning workshop, which will show you how to identify climate impacts and develop scenarios that illustrate potential risks and opportunities. And these will be run both online or in London on the 17th of September and 26th of November. And so now we've got some time to have a Q&A session, and we'll be answering any questions that you have submitted through the question function on the webinar. So feel free to add in questions as we go, and we can address those. So I can see we have a question which is asking about heat management controllers. Does it mean that the products currently under heating management controllers for wet heating systems will need to meet the revised eligibility requirements for the HVAC building controls category? I'll hand over to Tom if you have any views on this.
Thanks, mate. I mean, the simple answer is yes. But we have already mapped over the products in that existing category, with the new requirements. So we'll be communicating that as well. So.
Great, thank you. Another question is asking why do heat recovery units need to comply with AHRI 1060? Our units are manufactured in Europe as per the EN standards. So I'll shoot that over to Tom again.
Yeah, thanks. We basically have a variety of test standards, so it's not mandating one particular standard. Rather, it's a variety. So some manufacturers test to some, and some manufacturers test to others. So you'll see in the new criteria there are a variety of that.
Great, thank you. In terms of timescales, just to cover those again, so we are asking manufacturers to submit any additional evidence that they require at the moment, and to submit that to us by the 10th or the 17th of August, depending on which category you are, and we will have the outcomes of the reassessments for you by the 14th of September, and the list will go live on the 28th of September. So those are the expected timescales at the moment. And you may be asked for images of your products at the moment, and I'll just hand over to Kay to give a bit of an explanation of that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, May. So we have the ability now to be able to put pictures of products on the new website when that goes live in September. So we're gathering images that manufacturers might want to put of their products, so not more than 5 images, and to have a primary image flagged up as to what you'd like to use, and that will also be found in searches. And an email address as well, so that if a purchaser is interested in the product, rather than having just the website, they have a contact email, and that should then, their interest should then be flagged up to you much more quickly, and that it's come from the ETL. So we're keen to see how that works and the interest generated from the scheme with the new website. In terms of when those come back to us, the sooner we get them back, we do a review of those and then can add them to the site, so that when it is launched, which we expect in September, this new phase of the development, they'll be there right away.
Great, thank you, Kay. So we have another question asking about the change in requirements for cellar cooling systems requires SEPR data. In many cases, this will require retesting, and it's unlikely that we would be able to conduct this testing before the deadline. Does this mean that all products will be removed from the list? So I don't know if Kay or Tom want to answer that one.
Yeah, I can handle that. So the answer is no, products won't be removed. There's a transition period, and that transition period will be over the lifetime of basically the next review. So we review the criteria every sort of 2, 3, 4 years, and so we are running in parallel COP data and the seasonal efficiency parameters as well. So we're running 2 in parallel. So there is no need for immediate retesting. Rather, there will be a gradual transition over the lifetime of this next set of criteria until the next review.
Great, thank you. In terms of sharing these slides and the recording, we will be sending them out after the webinar, so you can come back to anything that we've covered during the session. And if you do have any other questions that you'd like to ask, you can contact us at etlquestions@carbontrust.com. But for now, if there aren't any other questions, just want to say thank you so much for attending and for joining the webinar today. Oh, actually, I've just seen one more come through, which we'll just cover. So why has the O2 criteria retained when all at the consultation meeting agreed that the bar was set too low for newer burners and didn't reflect the reductions in emissions when fitted to older inefficient burners, which would still not be able to meet the percentage for O2 criteria? So I think that might be one for Tom.
Yes, it probably is. I'm trying to recall back to that point. Perhaps we didn't receive enough data to warrant, from all manufacturers, to warrant changing or uplifting the performance threshold. So it was probably a product data issue. We do try to collect as much data as possible from manufacturers during the consultation process. So So at the moment, those thresholds have remained the same.
Okay, great, thank you. So if there aren't any other questions at the moment, thank you very much for joining, and we will be sharing these slides and the recording after this session. And thank you for all the presenters as well.